but if you just cast your mind back 5 years to what you were doing, where you were, and just think about what's changed in that time. So for me, I was not long into a new role at ASB Bank. Then COVID hit. Then the markets went haywire. We were heading towards negative interest rates. Remember that? That was pretty weird. The Reserve Bank, the most trusted institution we have, got hacked by a cyber attack, which caused a lot of pain for a lot of us in this room, I'm sure. We've had a mountain of regulatory change to grapple with, and that shows no sign of slowing down. And our relationships with our regulators has fundamentally changed as well. And a lot of, as they've armed up and become more inquisitive into what we do, just a real change in the way we need to engage with them. And we've got new ways of working. Working from home now is the norm, and that brings its own challenges and opportunities. And we've also got the robots coming. And if I think about, I was in this room a year ago on another subject, and there was some discussion around AI. And at that point, I'd heard of ChatGPT. I hadn't really done anything with it, but some people were talking about it. Whereas I was in a session yesterday, and everyone in the room was using some form of AI on an almost daily basis. So it's pretty crazy just to think how that's changed. And if I reflect on all of that, I sort of think about the really important role, very important role, that our in-house legal teams play in helping businesses navigate through all of that change and that complexity. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce today's panel. They are I can confirm they are rock stars in their field, and they're going to be sharing some pretty awesome insights into what they've been through and how they are organising their teams and their businesses for success. So first up, we have Vanessa Simons. I'll do a quick intro. So Vanessa is the General Counsel and Company Secretary at Fisher Funds, where she leads the risk, compliance, financial crime, AML and assurance teams. Got a bit on your plate, Vanessa. She's also Director of Catalyst, which is obviously New Zealand's stock exchange for SME businesses. Vanessa joined Fisher Funds in March 2023, bringing over 2 decades of experience across New Zealand's finance and legal sectors. Prior to this, Vanessa served as the General Counsel at Kiwi Wealth and has had senior legal roles at Kiwi Bank, the FMA and Meridian Energy. And Vanessa is also on the Executive Council of FinTech New Zealand. So welcome, Vanessa. You were? Okay. I won't ask what happened. We've got Brad Sinclair next. So Brad is Public Trust's General Manager of Legal, Governance and Board Secretary. And he's had that role since December 2022. He's been with Public Trust since 2015 and has had a variety of roles, including legal, procurement and property. And before joining Public Trust, Brad worked across the ditch and had a range of federal government organisations and across a range of federal government organisations. Brad's got extensive experience in providing practical and grounded advice on both corporate and commercial issues and helping Public Trust navigate the complex regulatory and governance landscapes that exist as a Crown entity. And last but not least, we have Ginny Numans, who's the Chief Risk Officer and General Counsel of PPS Mutual, which is New Zealand's newest life insurer. Ginny joined PPS Mutual in late 2023 as a founding executive to launch the business in New Zealand. PPS Mutual, for those that are unaware, is a member-owned mutual life insurer specialising in the professional market. And prior to joining PPS Mutual, Ginny held senior leadership roles at Westpac, ASB and Sovereign. She brings deep expertise in legal, risk and governance in both the banking and insurance industries. And full disclosure, I used to work for Ginny a long time ago, so I can attest to her experience. I may use today as an opportunity to ask her a few curveballs, so just be on the ready, Ginny. All right, so we'll get into it. Before we do, if you haven't if you haven't answered the poll question, if it's there's a poll question. It's disappeared from the screen. But you don't need to answer it if it's not on the screen. So what the question is, and that's the opening question for the panel, is other than COVID-19, what shift over the past 5 years has had the most significant impact on your business? Please use the app. Oh, here we go. Okay, well, look, I think there's a lot of themes that we're going to be covering today. So, yeah, we'll also have time at the end for questions, and please fire them through the app as well. All right, so let's get started. I think I'll throw the first one to Virginia, I should say. Looking back over the past few years, what one moment, challenge, or trend has fundamentally changed how you or your legal team operates today?
Thanks, Sam. Look, reflecting on this question, I actually don't think there has necessarily been one defining moment. If you I know we said we weren't going to talk about COVID-19, but COVID-19 was really the big accelerant of technology as an enabler to new ways of working. And now we're seeing the very fast emergence of AI, which is redefining our ways of working again, so that, if we are able to grab hold of AI and use it in a proper and effective way, it should enable us as lawyers to operate more effectively in the strategic space and take some of the AI, I think, can be a really effective intern or type assistant for us to enable us in our roles. In terms of my own experience, I think that through my roles in banking, it was probably the conduct and culture review and governance thematic reviews that for me have defined where we're at now, and the way that I've looked at building out my team. And I think the takeout for me really in respect of those thematic reviews is the importance of good governance and the way that those reviews really shaped the expectations around what good governance means. So understanding the stakeholder interests, identifying those stakeholders is super important. What do directors need? What do regulators expect? And how do we deliver to that? So for me, really sharp management reporting is absolutely critical. And I think lawyers play a really important part in that, because we're good at distilling a lot of information and identifying quite quickly what is the important information that that directors need to know and a regulator expects to see, or that we should be able to show the regulators. So I think we play quite an important coaching role for the business in that regard, as well as in our, with our COSEC hat-ons, actually protecting the directors in an environment where there's increasing director liability. And so we do need to be careful that they are getting the right information, both in terms of volume and type. With my team personally, in terms of building it, I'm speaking very much today from a startup experience, which is really unique, and I feel quite privileged to have had this opportunity. But our model is based very much on a lean operating environment. So my legal team, including myself, is three. So we are line 2 risk and compliance, regulatory affairs, legal, company secretary, board governance, quite a wide, much like Vanessa's actually when I heard your wide. So how do you deal to those, those broad functions effectively with a very small team of lawyers? So, being a startup, we're very lucky because I think in some ways it's much easier to start with, a clean slate and design to those requirements. So we very much took sort of a top-down view. How do we build our governance processes and our operating processes in a way that meets the needs of directors, that meets the expectations of regulators. So very much with a design hat on, so that we could try and create a structure that allowed us to meet the various expectations and interests, but in a way that's not overly burdened by complex compliance processes.
Thank you, Jenny. Vanessa, do you want to go next?
Is this on? Yes. Yep. All good. I've been really interested to hear the parallels between Jenny's startup and Fisher Funds, because we with the merger of Kiwi Wealth and Fisher Funds, which actually from my perspective started at the end of 2021 when the decision was made to sell Kiwi Wealth, and I was at that time the general counsel, and then a year of preparing for change and facilitating the sale, and then the sale happened to Fisher Funds at the end of that year, and then heading into 2023 with the new organisation. So unlike a fresh startup, very, very messy when you bring two organisations together, which were more or less the same size, and certainly the same size from a funds under management perspective. And it's been a really interesting journey to do that as part of the entity that was acquired, and just to see really a sort of a dawning understanding on the acquiring team that through the process of merger, the new entity is in fact brand new. It is a mixture of the acquired entity and the new. Much like a startup, it's a fresh start, but then there's a whole lot of legacy in behind and a whole lot of complexity that needs to be worked through. In the Fisher Funds case, we had a team very, very similar in terms of the risk and compliance side, so same structures. And I sort of inherited two heads of risk and compliance, two AML cos, and then the teams underneath them. So very similar structures, except Fisher's didn't have an in-house legal team, and so that has very much been a new process. And how do you embed an in-house legal team in an organisation that's never had one before? How do you structure that team? What's needed? And I think we'll touch on that a bit later as well.
Thank you, Vanessa. Brad?
Thank you. I might have to borrow from your lead actually a little bit of my response, and I think that we're probably in that moment right now. I feel that probably the most significant shift that I've noticed probably started about 3 years ago when we all got access to, I guess, consumer grade AI tools. But I think what's really been the shift that I've noticed is the last 12 months, as those have got incorporated into enterprise technology stacks. And I think as we've got access to not just basic, write a funny song sort of AI capability, things have really started to shift. If anyone hasn't played around with some of the deep thinking modes on AI, I think that's where I'm really noticing the game-changing functionality, particularly for in-house legal teams. These aren't the type of things where you'll put in a prompt and get an answer within 4 seconds. This is, do some thinking and watch the computer go away and think for 30 minutes and come back with an answer. And for me, that's where I've really noticed, not just is it, something that's going to shift us over the next 5 to 10 years, but it's something that's already changing the way I practice today, and I think my team does as well. Thomson Reuters just did a report on AI or the future of the legal practice, and 8 out of 10 legal professionals thought that AI was going to have a transformational shift over the next 5 years. I wouldn't be surprised if that's pretty similar sentiment across a lot of other industries, but I think the most transformative moment of the last 5 years, it's actually probably about right now.
Thank you, Brad. I might actually just jump on that, and I'm going to touch on AI a little bit later. But just can you give us some examples of some of the applications that you're using this for in your team, and sort of how are you using it on a sort of a weekly basis?
Oh, look, daily basis, I'd say. At the moment, look, I think for a lot of people, it started off as a personal productivity hack, but now it's moving into actual work. The actual, embedded process-driven as part of your core sort of, daily functions. I think we're still working towards that. But in terms of doing some deeper, more complex work, we're definitely there. So A good example is a couple of years ago, Public Trust did a research paper on digital wills, sort of wanting to prompt a discussion in New Zealand about, the benefit of digital wills and exploring that with government. That took my team probably about 6 months, not working full time, obviously, that would be a worry. But 6 months they went away and they came back with a really well-researched, couple of hundred references paper. I gave a similar challenge to one of the deep researcher modes, and I don't want to downplay the work of the team, but within probably 30 minutes, it came up with something really similar. Now, it's not perfect. You have to be diligent, right? You wouldn't want to go submitting something like that to a stakeholder and say that you're done. But in terms of a head start and getting some thinking, and the pure speed that you can deliver something, it's pretty impressive.
Well, yeah, that's certainly a lot of room for opportunities there, right? Okay, well, look, we're just going to shift gears a little bit. I want to just explore the theme around legal advisors as strategic advisors. I don't think that's necessarily anything new, that lawyers play a pretty key role in helping guide strategic direction. But yeah, just keen to sort of hear from each of you in your experience. What seat at the table does the legal team have in important strategic risk management, governance decisions? Brad, I might just start with you and go from there.
Got the mic. Look, I think legal should be at the top table. I think one of the really important things about in-house legal teams in particular is that they cut across the whole business. Your typical in-house advisor won't be focused on their vertical because they don't really have one. They'll be focused on other people's verticals and they'll be taking that enterprise view. And I think the opportunity of not having that enterprise view at the top table is an opportunity lost. What's important, though, is I think that leadership teams shouldn't expect their legal advisors to only turn up as a lawyer. I think that's another huge lost opportunity. Like any senior leader, they should be turning up wearing an enterprise hat, being a brain in the room that contributes to all discussions, but adding a legal foundation to that. So I think undoubtedly there's a place for lawyers at the top table.
Awesome. Jenny, what are your thoughts?
Thank you. You're probably going to hear me use the word unique quite a few times today because starting up PPS has very much been a unique experience. And that sort of started with me being employee number 2 in October 23 after the CEO. So just to put that into some context, we had no bank accounts, no tools of trade, no laptops, no phones, no office, we had nothing. And so that was very much hitting the ground running. You needed bank accounts in order to buy laptops and phones and get a lease and all the rest of it. So it really was sort of ground zero type stuff. But it was very much an opportunity as well to understand from the very beginning about what we were trying to achieve to set up a mutual organisation or a new mutual insurer in New Zealand. And how we went about that, from how we the corporate structure, the funding arrangements, how we met licensing requirements, our risk management program, even design of products. So it really was hands-on from the very beginning, and very much with a legal hat on, but also with an executive hat on as well, in terms of actually setting up the business. How do we do this? What should our operating model be? And lots of storming going on early on. So I think that very much put me and certainly my team, as they came on board, in an excellent position to have a really great understanding of the business objectives and how we were delivering to those, but also why we had made certain decisions. So a very lucky position to be in, but really also critical that we had excellent external advice from early on in the process, because when you are that involved in building the business and literally being on the tools, it does compromise, I think, our ability to act in some ways as legal advisors to the business. So that was a really, really important relationship to have. Yeah.
Amazing. Vanessa, I'm sure you've got some pretty similar parallels there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, so really echoing what Jenny and Brad have said, I guess I feel, that the adding the lawyer to the top table, there's a lot of interpersonal relationships that have to be managed through that process, and there are some structural problems that can be built into the way the teams are organised that make it very difficult for the lawyer in the room to have that enterprise view and be strategic. For example, if you are the company secretary and you're sitting in the boardroom, it's very hard to stop taking the minutes and engage in a strategic conversation if your board meeting is not recorded and you can't pick up what's being said, later on. And I think, that can really, it's a really good opportunity to use technology to support, as the company secretary in a room, your ability to have a strategic conversation. You're there, but you can't really participate if you're taking notes. I think also it's really important, if you're at that top table, to have the support and backing of the CEO. One thing that I have really appreciated in terms of moving from Kiwi Wealth to Fisher Funds, who didn't have a general counsel, and you add one person to a team, you change the team completely. So they added me, and really I changed the team completely, but they weren't really ready for it. Who was this person who didn't stick to her knitting and talk about legal matters, but wanted to engage in the wider conversation? And that's just something that on an interpersonal level, you have to develop your relationships with your peers. So you have to have your one-on-ones, your coffee catch-up, the water cooler conversations, and build that with the other exec at the table and the CEO. If you're in different locations, that's an even an additional challenge. But I think to be effective, you have to build the trust, and if you don't have the trust that they think that you're a good mind in the room and that you've got good stuff to say, then it's really hard to be influential.
Thank you, Vanessa. I might stick with you here. We're going to change again. Disruptive events. Obviously, COVID's been the big one in our minds. But what lessons have you learned? Have you taken from crisis events that you've sort of had the pleasure of dealing with? And how what have you learned in terms of how you prepare for the next unpredictable disruption?
So I just. I'm going to have to talk very high level because we're not Chatham House rules here. But one of the lasting impressions I've had in terms of dealing with a crisis event, not COVID, has been a cyber attack. And it is really the most scariest thing when your screen goes blank and the ransom message comes up. And the whole. Everyone around you is looking at the same thing. It is literally terrifying, and it's sort of you see it on movies and you hear about it when you're actually sitting there and the chief technology officer comes rushing up, and what should we do? What's next? In that case, there was no loss, and we were able to get control back fairly quickly. In terms of the lessons learned, I think having they call them playbooks, or having done tabletop exercises where your BCP, it's not just words on a page that kind of people have approved at the board meeting, but you've actually, in earnest gotten it out, used it, and done some real live sort of scenario work. I think one of the biggest things that we had right in that case was that we had good cyber insurance, and cyber insurance that allowed us to have pre-approved third parties that could step in immediately and advise us and help. Now I'm in the position I'm in now, that is something that I make sure of in cyber insurance, and it's actually not that common. Oftentimes the insurer will want to choose their own people, and you don't want that. You want to have your guys who know your systems already pre-approved to go, just like that. The other key lesson is just the amount of comms that, as the general counsel, you end up having to coordinate. So you've got to tell the board and all your stakeholders, and particularly if you've got a regulator as well, and so from your point of view, it's really good to have some playbooks as well, because it's probably be easier now. We've got ChatGPT to help write those comms a lot quicker, but we didn't have that at the time, and so a lot of time and effort to write those comms in the right way. Advise, but not terrify anybody.
Amazing. Jenny, with a startup having to build everything from scratch, have you managed to get a BCP playbook up and running?
Well, we have actually, Sam. And again, being at a startup, we're all very experienced though, and have had those experiences through our past roles. And I sort of reflect, and I was, fortunately or unfortunately, I'm not quite sure, but acting CRO at Sovereign when the Christchurch earthquakes happened. So that was my first real experience of a major event, and since then obviously we've had COVID and we had the Auckland floods. So you can take a lot of learning out of those experiences when we're designing what we need to put in place as a startup, and also there are firm regulatory expectations around this now. So yes, we brought a lot of that experience into the design of our enterprise business continuity plan, our business unit BCPs that support that. I think one of the challenges for us is that because with a startup you are evolving so rapidly, it's keeping those up to date. So even though we have them all in place, they need to be reviewed really regularly because things change quickly. So that we can put them, they are in the best position to be put into effect if they need to be called upon. And just really echo what Vanessa said about having good good experts on board early, so before you need them. So one of the key outcomes that I was really pushing for early on was to appoint our own external cyber expert, who also happens to sit on various insurance panels, so that we did have someone we could build a relationship with and who could advise us, because with a small team, again, we don't necessarily have that expertise internally to educate the board on cyber, and so develop those good external relationships, and yes, playbooks, absolutely, and a good crisis communication plan.
Right. Not a whole. Oh, that's very loud. Not a whole lot more to add. I think my role at Public Trust is coming from quite a different place in terms of not a startup and not a recent merger. And I think one of the key things there is that there's a risk of complacency when there isn't, a fundamental sort of organisational shift that forces you to relook at things. A lot of us, I think, were well practiced in BCP and crisis management throughout COVID. And I think there's a lot of lessons that probably most organisations took away from that about well-structured crisis management teams and responding quickly in the room. I think now, though, when you look at that 4 years later, there's a risk, I think, of organisations perceiving that they're still quite capable at this and not recognising that quite a lot has probably changed. So I think really it's just echoing, in particular your point, Vanessa, that keeping those up to date and re-looking at them is really important.
Thank you. Okay, shifting gears again. I want to talk about reg change, and I think everyone in this room, no doubt, has been impacted by this. And I don't want this to be a moan, but if you think about the last sort of 5-10 years, there's been fundamental change in the banking, insurance, conduct, prudential systems, and this is just, I think we're now just dealing with a whole new level of change, and which we should expect. So I just keen to get your perspectives on how do you balance legal risk with commercial pragmatism in shifting the reg environment. And Brad, I might start with you on that.
Thanks. Look, it goes without saying it's been a pretty dynamic 10 years. Public trust is quite interesting, sitting in a variety of different markets too. That regulatory reform agenda has really hit us in a lot of different fronts. I wouldn't have thought I'd be thinking about farms and charities and general sort of estate and succession law on top of the financial services layer as well. So it's definitely quite busy. what public trust has found, I think, very valuable in managing that balance is changing its mindset from being, I guess, a taker of change to an active participant in that process. New Zealand is, I guess, in that regulatory and policy development process. There's lots of opportunities to engage. And one of the things that we've found, I guess, really valuable, particularly recently in managing some of the commercial risks of regulatory change, is that early engagement. Government does not necessarily know how our customers operate. They don't know how things work on the front line. And there is a risk that without that engagement, policy can be made in a vacuum. And we've been, I guess, focusing on the basics, so obviously knowing what's coming, but then really how do we influence early? And there's lots of opportunities to do it, whether that's right at the beginning through the Law Commission, but as things progress through select committees, policy discussions, whether you're engaging either as an organisation or through industry bodies, there are lots of opportunities. And I think making sure that that commercial reality for your organisation and also, I guess, impacts on frontline customers, that government and policymakers are aware of that. We found that you can actually have an influence, and in a country like New Zealand, more often than not, there is an opportunity to be heard.
Yeah, absolutely. It is pretty amazing just how often you happen to find yourself sitting next to someone that's in government and are able to just have that conversation. And I think organisations like the FSC play a key role in that regard. Shout out to Carissa leading the REG committee. We regularly have it's attended by the policymakers that are drafting the legislation, and so there is ample opportunity to influence and get ahead. Ginny, any thoughts from you on?
Lots of thoughts.
Lots of thoughts. All right.
So I was around when the reg change sort of started. I was doing a quick Google this morning. When did it actually start? And it was with the FAA coming in 2008. And actually prior to that, we were one of the least regulated countries in the OECD. So it's actually been more than 10 years that we've been experiencing pretty much constant change. I think, again, as I sort of look at this question from a startup perspective, my takeout is our regulations, legislation are largely designed for existing providers in the market. And so when you're having to navigate all of those requirements as a new entity seeking to be regulated and entering the market, you realise actually how complex it is. And particularly because our mutual model involves a profit share benefit, which is the way that it's a mechanism to bring our sort of mutuality to life and to return to our members the financial success of the business. So our legislation largely deals with, from an insurance perspective, a pure risk market or legacy closed business. And then you have sort of requirements around investments and so forth. So we sat in this really interesting space of having a product that is designed as an insurance product, is very low risk on all accounts, but bumped into being deemed a managed investment scheme because of the definition under the FMCA and not having the AML built-in exemption for pure risk products. So it added extra complexity to have to navigate exemption processes and so forth. And also too in terms of actually becoming licensed. And I think we actually did a phenomenal outcome achieving our licenses within 18 months of starting with no bank accounts. But also reflecting on that process, you are actually required to set your entire business up and meet all legislative and regulatory requirements in order to open your door. There's no sort of transition period or leave pass that's given. You need to hit the ground running and be compliant from day one. So a lot of complexity there, and definitely opportunity that we can see through our experience where there might be areas that could be simplified to make it easier for new entrants to the market, or even existing existing participants, I think in terms of the new COFI requirements around operational resilience, and then the role of the Reserve Bank in terms of cyber resilience. Certain steps have been taken to align the requirements between the two regulators, but they are still different in the way that materiality is defined and the guidance that's given around that. And so I think that that is an area where there's opportunity for further simplification to occur. That's probably the key one that jumps out at me. Probably the other one would be as you're going through all of the different licensing and getting an FSPR number and all the things you need to do in order to start up. I think the number of times that I had to contact our poor directors repeatedly for the same information just reflected on that there could be a streamlined sort of centralised system where you have all of the directors up to date, the things that they need to provide, and that it's consistent across the areas that they need to provide it in. So definitely have some sort of insights, but again, a unique journey.
Very diplomatically handled, Jenny. Vanessa?
I think where I'd like to go is just in terms of thinking about commercial pragmatism and how you achieve that in your business while you're trying to adopt all the changes and the guidance. I just shout out to FMA when they come on site and do their on-site reviews. It's a great opportunity to talk to them and hear from them firsthand what they see in your business about where you are in relation to the minimum standards. And we recently had just a normal regulatory on-site visit, and it's been a long time since FMA has come into one of the businesses that I've been working on, and I think they've had a bit of a gap there, perhaps while they've been doing their organisational change. But in my position, when I'm trying to talk to the business about how to actually embed real change in the business to reflect the regulatory change, there's a lot of judgment calls that need to be made in that. And if you've got FMA coming on site, it focuses the mind, gets everybody's attention. You get a report at the end of it, and you basically get a scorecard, and then you can look at the areas where you might want to improve. And when the cost of regulatory burden needs to be assessed against all the other things that the business wants to spend money on, I think FMA being visible, coming on site, and again, shout out to them when they came to visit us. They were pragmatic, friendly, really engaging, and really great to have. So that part of the way they're interacting with businesses at the moment, I think is really positive.
That's great to hear, and that flows on nicely to my next one, which is around relationships with regulators. Certainly, when I sort of started out, it was very much a sort of an arm's length relationship, and I think everyone was a little suspicious about why were they asking these questions, that sort of thing. It's now changed to a sort of a weekly. I don't want to give too much away, but a weekly sort of relationship that we have with some of our regulators, and I think what I've reflected on is an informed regulator is actually very helpful to the business, rather than one that comes in and from left field asking weird questions that we don't know what their agenda is. So we've certainly in the businesses that I've been involved in, as we've kind of grown that relationship, it really has helped. Help the business understand, to your point. So maybe I'll just continue on that theme, and I'll start with you, Jenny, and drawing from your recent experience with having to build those relationships as you've got your licenses, etc., and also previous experience. How do you approach your relationships? What sort of value do you put on it?
Huge value. I just mentioned before that we. From nothing sort of entered the market or were licensed within 18 months, and we couldn't have done that if it wasn't for the relationships that we built with the FMA and the Reserve Bank. and that they were available to meet with us whenever we needed, and we responded to their questions when they needed. We had a lot of engagement through that period, but it was really, really constructive engagement that, as I stand back and reflect, it was about, I would say, helping us get into the market. It was very much about, it was working with them to navigate the complexity and to achieve the outcomes that we needed in order to launch. And, you know, I talk about the timing, but it's really important when it's expensive setting up, you know, a new business. So getting into the market as quickly as you can, but doing so in a way that you are well structured and set up to meet your regulatory requirements is a real balancing act. So we had a lot of engagement. They were very, very, both regulators were extremely helpful. And now now we're moving to, I guess, the next stage in that relationship, now that we are regulated and operating, and really my focus is to build on and maintain appropriately that sort of transparent, constructive relationship. So in terms of what have I taken, and my team, we're quite senior, so we've all got a lot of experience in dealing with regulators through previous roles, and it does help to understand or to have had experience of what not good looks like, and how much more difficult it can be to work with a regulator if there isn't a real basis of trust and reputation and credibility there. So we're very mindful of that, the relationships that we've built to get to launch, and then how we really maintain that as we navigate the next sort of 18 months, 2 years in the new cycle of our maturity, which is really when things will be tested. We haven't had the visits yet. We know when they're going to occur. No doubt we'll get a scorecard and we won't be perfect, but there's real learnings to be taken from that. So I think it's really, really important engagement to us.
Awesome. Brad, in your role, public trust, obviously that organisation has a interesting space there, sort of on the regulated and regulator type side. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it definitely is an interesting place. So as a licensed supervisor, overseeing fund managers, is sort of the butter between two slices of bread, being the FMA and our customers, which puts us in a really interesting place. On one hand, we're carrying out a quasi-regulatory function, it's supervisory. And, in some ways, in that respect, the working relationship with the FMA is inherently close. On the flip side of that, our primary interest is looking after and what's in the best interest of investors. So it's a really, really interesting dynamic that we're in. Look, I think as with the previous answers, transparency is really key. An open relationship with the FMA, clear communication and regular meetings about how things are going. That goes, I think, in the current climate as expectations have changed, particularly over the last 5 years. We're in this interesting place with increased scrutiny from the regulator, but also at the same time increased, I guess, pressure from fund managers or from clients looking to do innovative things. And so managing that balance puts you in a really interesting place. And I think for public trust, we stand in this position where we have responsibilities and respect to clients, but then we can also advocate for what we think is in the best interest of investors and push back with the FMA too, where we think that there are potentially better outcomes. And that's something that we try to do where it's appropriate.
Awesome. Vanessa, do you have anything more to add on the subject?
Well, I think, echoing the transparency, we're lucky in my team, 2 of us are ex-FMA, and so, if you can get folk who've worked in the regulator, it really helps because it provides an insight into how they make decisions, and also you bring those informal connections with you as well, and I think the, a bit like the startup, the merger for Fish Funds, Kiwi Wealth, again, very transparent, regular calls, lots of just informal meetings, didn't have to be long, with a slide presentation of where we were at, and just enabling them to follow us on that journey and to give them the comfort that, we did have good client outcomes at the forefront. So that just echoing the transparency there, and sort of the FMA's ongoing work and kind of doing that. I was at a session a couple of weeks ago on scams and how the industry, the fund managers, could come together and really think about how to deal with scams, which I think we might be talking about that next actually. But yeah, it's just another example of how we can work together to improve market integrity and confidence.
Thank you. Look, we're going to. We've got about 10 minutes left, and I will leave some time. There's a few questions that have come through, but no session in 2025 is complete without a discussion on AI. Brad, you've started a little bit of discussion on that, so I'll come back to you at the end. But interested, Vanessa, Ginny, in your how you're using AI. How your organisation is using AI, and how, in particular, within from a legal perspective, where are you at on that journey?
We are at the stage of the cycle where we are developing our AI policy. So I think most people in our business have been using AI off the side of their desk. And obviously there are concerns that come with that in terms of confidential information, et cetera, lawyers in the room, so I don't need to talk to you about all of that. Definitely we've been using it. So it's about how to now structure it in a way that that protects the business, but also leverages the best opportunities out of AI. I think we've been really fortunate because of our relationship with PPS in South Africa, that we can leverage a lot of what they are doing, and they're developing in the strategic direction that they are taking AI in. So I attended a really interesting session on AI over in South Africa recently and came back all excited about what we were going to do in New Zealand here. So we're just starting to get that moving. But absolutely, AI has been a very much a supporting, how do we get sort of the basics done quickly, and then, put our experience and overlay over the top, just because of the speed that we've had to get things done. But, now we need to actually put the proper controls and processes around that. But it's very much a part of our future. I think the speaker I listened to in South Africa talked about it sort of like the internet, that seeing the same trajectory, and that when the internet first came on, it was sort of a very steep curve, and then it will level out, and we're not a curve steep, upwards. We're sort of on the steep up now, so can expect it to have a very big impact very quickly before it levels out.
So we have an AI policy, and it's already out of date. Needs refreshing. I'm seeing two things, a bottom up and a top down. So top down, we've sent our chief operating officer and our chief customer officer on a deep dive AI course that they had to do homework and they had to do a research project, so quite in depth, and they've come back very, very excited about possibilities but also risks, so very balanced. And then we've been encouraging bottom up, so sort of grassroots experimentation and team bringing ideas to the exec, where they've sort of done little case studies and things about showing or showcasing how it can be used. In terms of legal teams, I just wanted sort of to touch on, and this is something we talked about at exec, like what is it doing to the structure of our workforce, and what is it doing to legal teams? And there's already talk of graduates in some of the consulting firms, that the numbers being halved. And I think of the way I use AI, it's like grad Vanessa. So I get it to do stuff that you'd get a grad to do, and I find it really productivity enhancing. But we have 3 lawyers in the team, and one is a junior. That's depriving that person of an opportunity to learn, making me faster, but she's not learning. And so this is going to be a challenge, I think, because you need to have experience and acumen in order to get the most out of your AI. And how do you get that if we're kind of bypassing those junior lawyers?
It's a really interesting point, because I think a lot of what what you've said today is that obviously as a legal function you need to be smart, you need to know your discipline, but so much of it is the soft stuff, is the relationships you build and the nuances across the organisation externally, and it's hard to see. At least right now, and I could be naive, but it's hard to see how grad Vanessa can kind of develop that, as opposed to the other person, the actual grad in your team. Yeah.
And that's right, and you build that experience through researching. I mean, there's those foundational early years are so important to, your maturity as a lawyer. So I think it's a real risk. To keep an eye on and how it's addressed.
Look, we've got a few minutes left, and the session will start shortly. Carissa, there's a couple of questions that have come through. Feel free to just...
Yeah, we've got a few minutes left. A lot of them have been around AI, and I think we've just covered off that there are a lot of risks around using it. How do you ensure that it's accurate, giving reliable inputs? How do you give assurance to stakeholders that they're going to get the right answer, or they need to come with you, the collaborative type approach? So I guess any elaboration you can do on that, and building trust with stakeholders to ensure a legal human remains in the loop. Any further thoughts in that space?
Brad, you sounds like you're sort of taking AI from a kind of a productivity hack to more sort of a deep uses.
It's a hope. It's a journey, though. I think in the long term, what we will see in the legal space is, and it's already happening in the document production space. It's almost a commoditization of the answer, of the black and white answer. But where I think lawyers will continue to add value is the overlay that is unknown to an AI, or which is inherently specific to your business. And that's the strategic overlay. That's how the different issues intersect. And it's what to do with the answer. And I think that's where humans, and particularly lawyers, will continue to add value, at least in the short term. And I'd hope into the future as well. But I think we're very early on this journey, so we'll have to see how it plays out.
Any other questions in the room? Anyone would like to add anything? Otherwise, I'll wrap up, I think.
We've got time probably for a couple more.
A couple more, okay.
Do you think that New Zealand, with the exception of some legislation like climate-related disclosures, is actually catching up with other similar jurisdictions from a regulatory perspective? Or does New Zealand have an opportunity to better shape financial regulation to make it proportionate?
The two jurisdictions that I have the most experience working with outside of New Zealand are South Africa, which is a very mature jurisdiction in terms of conduct and so forth, and Australia through my roles in the bank. I think we always look to Australia to see what's coming to New Zealand, because it does always come here. It's just a question of how long will it take, somewhere between sort of 0 and 2 years usually. But I think there is, there's absolutely opportunity to look at how to right-size that to New Zealand and to the size of the New Zealand market and the makeup. I've found South Africa really useful, particularly in terms of the conduct and governance related, or their King Code over there, to sort of look at our requirements here and pick the eyes out, so pick the best bits. So I already kind of do that. But to answer your question around sort of our regulation here, yes, I think if we look to other jurisdictions, how they're doing things, there's opportunity to really analyse it and make it better for us, and with a real focus on proportionality and simplification, because ultimately overly complex regulation, there's compliance cost that comes with that, and that stifles innovation. So
I think one last one that we haven't really covered is working from home. Managing teams of people that are now working from home seems to be more commonplace than the exception. How do you manage that? Is it a challenge? Is it an enabler?
think let's lock the doors. We'll be the next hour.
I mean, I think that if you are managing a team who is scattered, whether scattered throughout New Zealand or sometimes scattered overseas as well, that's actually really no different than managing teams that work from home. So I don't think that it's a new problem. It's just that where your people are based, can be in more locations now. So I try and sort of take the view, as a manager of people who are in various locations, I need the face-to-face with them, but I can't expect to have it all the time because they're not in the same location as me anyway. We really, in a growing business, you don't have that luxury of having everyone close. I would say that lawyers in particular learn from being embedded in the business and listening, and so I think having anchor days or days where people can have that opportunity to learn are important, but I don't think it's that new.
That's great. Great. Well, look, anything to add? Otherwise, we'll
just an add-on again from the new business startup point of view. If you've got senior people, we're all very capable of working from home, but it's the other pieces that you miss if you haven't got that balance right, and particularly in a startup where things are evolving so quickly and things are happening that need to be dealt with, you need to make sure that there is that time on the ground in the business together to understand that. But also culturally, as the business grows and new people join, the culture's also evolving really quickly, and that only comes through in-person engagement. So we're sort of working through at the moment, moving from program mode where we were all connecting multiple times during the week to, well, what does BAU operating look like? How do we shift some of those meetings but not lose the connectivity? And we haven't quite got it right yet. But it is really important for connectedness to be in person.
Yeah, it's a really good point. Well, look, guys, thank you to the panel. Really appreciate your time. I hope everyone here today took a lot of insights out of that. I certainly did. I think, one thing I've, they often say is that the legal department is the common sense department, and I think that's very apt. I mean, they're obviously smart people, but what this is sort of really reinforces is the relationship side of things. You've talked about the importance of having a really strong relationship with your regulators, our ability to influence policymakers, being able to protect the board, stakeholders throughout the business, and you play such a key role with that. And I think AI, it sounds like for all the lawyers in the room, you've still got a job for a few years to come at least. And I think just the power of being able to balance that technology whilst also adapting your model. Maybe just a couple of little sound bites from you as we wrap up. Any last words of wisdom from anyone?
Really thought about words of wisdom. I think I've given all my words of wisdom. Oh, look, it's a great time to be a lawyer. I think that's probably, it's such a rapidly evolving environment and context at the moment, and you can look at that and find it hard, or you can look at it and see the challenge and the opportunity and the learnings that come with it. So that's probably my...
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Shall I go? You go. I think it's about people.
Yep.
I think being a successful lawyer is also about not just your technical ability, but your EQ with others in your organisation and outside it.
I'll finish how I started. Go back to your organisation and make sure you can get an enterprise AI tool. Try not to use ChatGPT online. Talk to your IT department, get one integrated that can access your documents, and then play with it. Researcher mode in particular, deep thinking mode, give it a try, and hopefully be prepared to be, shocked.
Amazing. Everyone, if we could just do a round of applause for the panel. Thanks very much.